Good morning. Wanted today to finish up the Vietnam War, talking about how it comes to an end, how we lost. I mean, it technically isn't a war, so we haven't lost a war, but we basically lose this situation. But I wanted to kind of recap a little bit from yesterday. So I'm still in the protest. I got my Abbey Road Beatles shirt. I've got my peace sign. Oh yeah, Jimmy. Forgot to tell you, Jimi Hendrix is here. But I wanted to cover a little bit about yesterday to see, follow up on how those activities went with you, and then talk about how the war comes to an end. So I'm on the history page, and I posted a few songs for you. So on this video, the Vietnam and the Counterculture, that's the one I posted, and I talked about quite a bit here, including analyzing a couple of videos, and I turned you loose on the rest of these. Now, Joni Mitchell, if you're trying to find a meaning to Big Yellow Taxi, it's a few things, but it's kind of one of the first environmental songs of the hippie era. I mean, there's other stuff, but where she's talking about you don't know what you've got till it's gone. You've paved paradise and put up a parking lot. You took away all these beautiful things. And she says to the farmers, put away the DDT, which is the chemical that it was a pesticide, but it was harmful to birds. Okay. Eventually it was banned, but at the time it wasn't. And, it's a sort of an environmental message to the song. Okay. And then Blowing in the Wind is all sorts of things. He talks about how many times do we have to have war. He talks about the civil rights movement. When he says, how many years do some people exist before they're allowed to be free? So he's talking about a lot of things, and the whole meaning of the song is the answer is blowing in the wind. We haven't apparently figured it out yet. We haven't come up with that. We haven't caught that answer. So he's saying there's problems out there, and we still haven't solved them. And the Beatles song, now, Come Together, your guess is as good as mine as far as what that's about. I didn't put that on there because it was super meaningful as far as the Vietnam War era. I put it on there because it kind of hints that there was drugs involved. If you looked at the lyrics, clearly they were high when they wrote that song. Just like, but the Beatles, John Lennon, this guy right here, he sometimes would write songs that didn't have necessarily a meaning, just to mess with people. If you ever listen to the song I'm the Walrus, I suggest looking it up. But he wrote it on purpose to have no meaning, because people always analyzed his lyrics to see what's the hidden meaning of this song. What is it really trying to say? So he's like, I'm just going to write a song that means nothing and let them figure it out. Let them try and figure it out. But the words are so bizarre that you're like, it must have been high when writing this one. So I just wanted you to get a snippet of what the counterculture was all about. Anti-war. They were pro-environment. They were trying to solve social issues. And sometimes they were just doing drugs. Sad but true. So, but that's part of what gets the country to get out of the war, is that with so much opposition to the war, it was very unpopular. And Lyndon Johnson, running for president again in 1968, changed his mind. Decides not to run again because he's so unpopular due to the war. And you have Robert Kennedy, who becomes kind of the front runner. Eugene McCarthy. These guys were anti-war candidates. They were against Vietnam, and they were making progress because of that. Well, Robert Kennedy is killed in June of 1968. And other campaigns start to kind of fall apart. During the convention in August of 1968, The Democrats decide not to push for, as a national movement, not to push for the end of the war, and there's a riot outside the convention, and it just turns ugly. And eventually, Hubert Humphrey, the vice president under Johnson, was nominated for the candidate in 1968, and the Democrats just fell apart. And Richard Nixon, the Republican, wins the election. All right, so I'm going to talk about a couple things. First of all, we're going to talk about why Vietnam is so hard to win. And second, we're going to talk about Nixon and his policies. But first, a word from my sponsor, crisp, refreshing Diet Mountain Dew. All right, it's not really a sponsor, but if I didn't have it, I might not be here. Okay, so going back to the war, I'm going to go back to some notes here. This one? Yeah, this one. One of the reasons the war was so dang hard to win is that we were in South Vietnam. We didn't attack the North, other than bombing a little bit with jets and so on, a lot bit. But we were fighting guerrilla warfare, as you saw it, against guerrilla warfare, hit and run tactics. They had tunnels, they had booby traps. We didn't know where the enemy was. It wasn't like a traditional war, like enemies here, you go there, get them. It was the enemies anywhere, everywhere, nowhere. Find them. Okay. Another problem is this little thing right here is called the Ho Chi Minh Trail. A lot of supplies and weapons and help from the north was coming along this trail. Not in Vietnam. Okay. Outside of Vietnam. We're engaging in Vietnam. We're not going outside the country. And when we did, it became very unpopular. So it was very difficult to stop the flow of weapons. See? You need Diet Mountain Dew. We were having a hard time stopping the flow of weapons. And so it went on and dragged on, became a war of what they call a war of attrition. How long could we hang in there and really care about this? Well, with all that stuff going on at home, the counterculture, the protests, we were losing the will to hang in there. Uh-oh. All right. And that's where Nixon comes in. Peace, man. In this year, 1968, we had some horrible things. In January, the Tet Offensive was launched, where the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese launched simultaneous attacks on a bunch of South Vietnamese cities. We didn't know they had the strength to do it. And when they did it, it told us we could no longer really win this war. There's not a winning event in sight. Because of dissatisfaction with Vietnam, Johnson decides not to run for president. As we know, MLK, Martin Luther King, is assassinated in April of 1968. Robert Kennedy was assassinated in June. And there were riots outside of the Democratic Convention, all sorts of turmoil that year. Lots of stuff going on. And it just became a breaking point. And because of the Democrats falling apart, Nixon wins the election. And Nixon decides, this might be it. Oh, yeah, got to go to the next one. Nixon decides to go with a policy called Vietnamization. All right, so let's talk about that. Vietnamization is increasing their policy of having South Vietnamese soldiers taking over the ground fighting. So we were slowly withdrawing troops, American troops, from Vietnam and making the South Vietnamese Army, the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, or what they called the ARVN Army. We were making them take over the fight. It's not unlike what we did in Iraq, what we've been trying to do in Afghanistan, in this current war. We're still in war, by the way. Where we're training in Iraq, what we did is we trained the Iraqi soldiers and slowly withdrew American troops. Same thing in Vietnam, where we said, okay, we're going to withdraw troops. Vietnamese soldiers are going to take over. The problem with that was we weren't sure they were really willing to fight. a lot of them weren't in this for the fight. They didn't necessarily buy into it because they're saying, wait, we want kind of what the North has. Why are we fighting? So the will of South Vietnam to keep up the fight was not really there, or the ability in the long term. So it starts to crumble. Peace talks. We go into what the Paris peace talks, trying to settle this war. And Nixon wanted to get out with what he called peace with honor. It didn't really happen. But in order to convince the North, because they weren't going to talk with us, in order to convince them, we escalated the war. So it was really kind of a tricky thing where we're escalating action against the North to try and get them to talk to us. Say, all right, let's get out of this thing. Talks break down. We go into Cambodia or help South Vietnamese troops go into Cambodia. It gets ugly. Nixon announces that we've been bombing Cambodia. There are riots and backlash because of it. Kent State killings happened. It was during a protest against Nixon going into Cambodia. And 4 students were killed. So, I mean, it really is showing the polarization. This war was kind of tearing the country apart, and we want to get out. So Nixon eventually starts withdrawing troops to the point where by early 1975, there were very few Americans left, mainly in and around the city of Saigon, the capital of South Vietnam. And the North then was now invading the South and closing in on Saigon. And this photograph is from late April of 1975, April 30th. The last helicopter takes off from the roof of the embassy. They were trying to evacuate as many people as they could before the North arrived. And that day, the North pulls into Saigon and the war's over. Now, I'm going to attach a video. There's more to that story on Classroom that gives you the fall of Saigon. But that's pretty much it. Very, very short version of what happened in the war. And I would like to give you more details. But with the way we're doing the online learning and we're doing a smaller study guide, that's what you'll have to settle for. Normally, we would get much more detailed about what happens. But this is not normal. So I'm going to end this before I keep talking too long. But what I want you to do is go ahead and finish that study guide. Find those dates. I gave you some of them already in the video that I just had. And they're all somewhere around in our study guide, but they're easy to Google too. So do that. Find the dates. This will be on the test in some way, shape, or form. So I would make sure you have those dates. Okay? Have any questions? Email me, Zoom with me on weekdays from 10 to noon. We're going to have a test next Thursday on this, and that'll be the end of the school year for you. So we're getting close. Just hang in there and keep doing the work. You're doing a great job. And I'll talk to you soon. Bye.